Welcome, 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 dear friends. Thank you for joining us in commemorating the 100th anniversary of Abdu'l-Bahá's passing. This is Prince George's seventh and final Abdu'l-Bahá's Writings and Stories Town Hall. In November 2021, the world commemorated the 100th anniversary of the passing of Abdu'l-Bahá. The Universal House of Justice gave us 26 prayers revealed by Abdu'l-Bahá that were newly translated. We also had the initiation of construction on the shrine of Abdu'l-Bahá, and then 2 films, The Exemplar, which was a portrait of the person of Abdu'l-Bahá, and Glimpses of 100 Years of Endeavor. We also took a personal initiative where our team identified local effort that could give this anniversary lasting impact. Make a personal commitment to learn more about Abdu'l-Bahá. Practice telling favorite stories about Abdu'l-Bahá's life and then share them with friends. Incorporate stories and writings of Abdu'l-Bahá into our core activities. Invite friends to town hall style gatherings like this, where participants share writings and life stories of Abdu'l-Bahá. We gave 6 history presentations via Zoom. 4 are now on YouTube, and showed 2 films via Zoom, also on YouTube. That was Luminous Journey, Abdu'l-Bahá in America, and Abdu'l-Bahá in France. Tonight we complete this series and we dedicate it to our team member, William Michael Winters, who passed on to the Abba Kingdom on September 3rd. This is a prepared program of stories from the life of Abdu'l-Bahá. From 1912, when Abdu'l-Bahá visits Europe for the second time, to 1921, when his earthly life ends. Much of what we will talk about is infrequently discussed because it is so complex and is deeply affected by World War I, such that the parts don't make sense without knowing the whole. We are bringing you the whole. After our presentation, attendees will be invited to share stories and quotes. They can be from other years and other authors, but should help us better understand Abdu'l-Bahá. This is also an opportunity to practice telling a story from memory. He is God, O thou kind and beloved Lord. These friends are exhilarated with the wine of the covenant and are wanderers in the wilderness of thy love. Their hearts are consumed by the flames of tenderness from thee, and they yearn eagerly for the revelation of thy splendors. From thine invisible kingdom, the realm of unseen, reveal unto them the effulgent glory of thy grace, and shed upon them the radiance of thy bounty. At every moment, send forth a new blessing and reveal a fresh favor. O divine providence, we are weak, and thou art the most powerful. We are as tiny ants, and thou art the King of the realm of glory. Bestow thy grace and confer thy bounty upon us, that we may kindle a flame and shed its splendor abroad, that we may show forth strength and render some service. Grant that we may bring illumination to this darksome earth and spirituality to this fleeting world of dust. Suffer us not to rest for a moment, nor to defile ourselves with the transitory things of this life. Enable us to prepare a banquet of guidance, inscribe with our life blood the verses of love, leave fear and peril behind, become even as fruitful trees, and cause human perfections to appear in this ephemeral world. Thou, in truth, art the all-bountiful, the most compassionate, the ever-forgiving Abdu'l-Bahá.
In the program you're about to see, there are 3 parts. First, we're going to look at what was happening in the US 1912 to 1921, especially relating to people of African heritage. Second, we're going to go to Europe and the Middle East and the forces shaping Palestine during World War I. And thirdly, we're going to focus in on the life of Abdu'l-Bahá during this period, the last 9 years of his life, in the midst of the turmoil around World War I. U.S. African American life in this 8-year period. 6 points that I'll make to begin with. The African Americans in the U.S. face significant challenges due to systemic oppression and overt violence. Their resilience and cultural expression developed while striving for equality and justice laid the groundwork for the civil rights movement in our day, years to come. Jim Crow laws institutionalized racial segregation in public facilities such as schools, transportation, lodging, and restrooms, enabled by an 1898 Supreme Court decision, and were termed separate but equal. Of course, they were separate, but they weren't equal. Racial violence and lynchings, often carried out by white supremacist groups, were a tool for enforcing racial hierarchy and intimidation of the Black population. That's 3 of the points. The other 3, the educational economic opportunities for African Americans were limited, especially in the South, with many African Americans relegated to low-paying jobs and faced with systemic barriers to career advancement. One partial solution was many African Americans migrated from the rural South to the industrial North and the West, termed the Great Migration, with the hope of better opportunities and living conditions and jobs. The 6th point, the Harlem Renaissance, the flourishing of African American art, music, literature, intellectual pursuits, centered in New York City in the Harlem area, showcased the resilience and creativity of the Black community. I'm going to focus on the Harlem Renaissance for a little bit. Abdu'l-Bahá was guiding the community of the American believers to promote racial justice and amity. And Baha'i race amity efforts were audacious, seeking to overcome Jim Crowism by openly putting into practice interracial harmony, attracting the interest of the Black intelligentsia. One example, Elaine Locke, the first African-American Rhodes Scholar, was attracted to the faith and enrolled in 1918. In those days, you wrote to Abdu'l-Bahá, and he did, and he received a tablet in return. Point that I didn't realize, he was directly involved in Baha'i race amity activities, including traveling with Louis Gregory on a lecture tour to speak about the Baha'i relationship to racial equality. Dr. Locke is acknowledged as the dean of the Harlem Renaissance. In our time, Martin Luther King stated, "We are going to let our children know that the only philosophers that lived were not only Plato and Aristotle, but W.E.B. Du Bois and Elaine Locke came through the universe." I mentioned W.E.B. Du Bois. He met Abdu'l-Bahá in 1912 during his visit to North America and expressed interest in the faith for a time and worked with Baha'is in the NAACP, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, which he co-founded. He was the editor of the NAACP's monthly publication, The Crisis, and he published articles by Baha'is, and in the May 1912 edition, on page 14, is this full-page photo of Abdu'l-Bahá along with an article about him that took up his Men of the Month column. A little bit of a timeline in this 1913 to 1921 time period. Formation at Howard University of Delta Sigma Theta, Black sorority, now one of the largest Black women's organizations in the world. 1914, President Woodrow Wilson orders resegregation of federal workplaces and employment after 50 years of integrated facilities. 1915, the song Lift Every Voice and Sing is declared by NAACP as the African American National Anthem. 1916, Marcus Garvey comes from Jamaica with the idea of vocational colleges, promotion of business ownership, brotherhood among African diaspora in the United States. He gets a lot of attention. The U.S. in 1917 enters World War I, and 370,000 Black Americans joined the armed forces. 1919, movie maker Oscar Micheaux releases his first film, The Homesteader, and becomes one of the most prominent Black filmmakers, producing 24 silent and 19 sound films over his career. Again, in 1919, race riots erupt in U.S. cities, becomes the Red Summer of 1919. 1921, the Tulsa race riot in Oklahoma. 1920, the Negro National Baseball League was established. This is numbers of lynchings of Black Americans by year. It's a steady number. It was in the hundreds in prior years. Incredible, really. Intimidation, form of social control.
Meanwhile, in the Middle East, another chapter unfolds in a very complex story. Old Testament events took place in the Holy Land thousands of years ago. In 70 AD, destruction of Jerusalem and of the Second Temple by the Romans eliminated the symbolic center of Judaism and began a long period of displacement of the Jewish people, most of whom left their homeland and settled elsewhere on the globe. In 132 AD, Jews were forbidden access to Jerusalem. From the 1500s to 1917, the Holy Land was ruled by the Ottoman Empire, an Islamic superpower. In 1844, the strict exclusion of the Jews from their own land, enforced by the Muslims for some 12 centuries, was at last relaxed by the Edict of Toleration, and the times of the Gentiles were fulfilled, according to George Townsend. Many Jews in Europe joined the Zionist movement, aiming to create a Jewish national state in its ancient homeland. Some moved to the Holy Land. In 1917 to 1918, during World War I, Britain captured Palestine from the Turks to safeguard the Suez Canal and sources of oil. British troops would remain there until 1948. The British government made contradictory promises. First promise, made in 1915 to Sharif Hussein of Mecca, that the Arabs could have an independent Arab state after the war, if they would rise up against their overlords, the Turks, which they did. This has remained controversial for over 100 years. Next, the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement in 1916 between Britain and France, proposing to keep Palestine under international control. And third, the Balfour Declaration issued in 1917 to a Jewish leader promising a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. The idea that the Jewish people should be restored to the Holy Land so that biblical prophecies could be fulfilled had been promoted by some Christians since the 1600s. Then, from the 1890s, the idea of Zionism began to take hold among some Jews, as Theodor Herzl argued that the Jewish people needed a political homeland of their own if they were to escape the horrific anti-Semitic persecution that was rife, particularly in Russia and Central Europe. By the early 1900s, Herzl's successor, Chaim Weizmann, saw Britain as the power with the global influence to make the Zionist goal a reality. So he set out to convince leading politicians that the Jewish people needed a homeland in Palestine where they had deep spiritual and historical bonds. The Balfour Declaration was the result. Why did the War Cabinet respond to Zionist pressure in this way? Foreign Secretary Balfour was one of the highly placed Christians in British society who believed that the Jewish people should be restored to the Holy Land. Prime Minister Lloyd George, who also came from a restorationist background, dreamt of putting Israel back on the map. Yet at the same time, there were strategic calculations for issuing the Balfour Declaration. At this desperate point in the European conflict, the War Cabinet hoped that the promise of a Jewish homeland would win for the Allies the sympathies of Jews and their supporters worldwide. However, the British government did not consult the people then living in Palestine about its plans to create a Jewish homeland there. 90% of the population of Palestine, 700,000, were Arabs who lived together with a small Jewish community of about 80,000. Palestine had been predominantly Arab in culture and language for many centuries. Yet, in private in 1919, Balfour wrote, "In Palestine, we do not propose even to go through the form of consulting the wishes of the present inhabitants." The major powers were now committed to Zionism, which Balfour described as being of far profounder import than the desires of the Arab inhabitants. The Balfour Declaration simply stated that the civil and the religious rights of the non-Jewish population should not be prejudiced. So when the war came to an end, how would all these complex undertakings work out in practice? As the Western powers met in Paris in 1919 to negotiate the peace settlement, Sheriff Hussein sent his son Faisal to make sure Britain's promise of independence for the Arabs was not forgotten. But instead, the newly formed League of Nations handed control of Palestine to Britain. Under the terms of the League of Nations mandate for Palestine, Britain was required to implement the Balfour Declaration by supporting the creation of a Jewish national home, and at the same time to prepare the people of Palestine for eventual self-government. The League of Nations stated that mandatory powers held a sacred trust to ensure the well-being and development of people in their care. What happened to the other areas that Sheriff Hussein anticipated would gain independence? Transjordan, now Jordan, was made an autonomous emirate under Hussein's son Abdullah. In the same way, the new kingdom of Iraq was given to his brother Faisal. These were the rewards Hussein received for his loyalty to the British war effort, but they did not include Syria or Palestine. Angry Arab crowds soon massed in Jerusalem, denouncing the Balfour Declaration and demanding the self-determination that had been promised by Britain and France in 1918. Having made conflicting promises, Britain now had to face up to their consequences. She had created a contradiction. Just how unworkable this situation was, it took her 30 years to accept. Both communities, Jews and Arabs, believed they had been promised the land. As the Zionists swiftly began to implement their objectives, the Arabs were the first to conclude they had been deceived. Riots broke out in 1920. Subsequent attempts to establish a two-state solution have been rejected by Arab leaders who insist that Israel must go away. Now, 103 years later, not much has changed.
It was December 5th, 1912, that Abdu'l-Bahá boarded the SS Celtic in New York Harbor and departed the U.S. following his historic 239-day visit. On December 13th, Bahá'ís from London, Paris, and north of England gathered to welcome Abdu'l-Bahá for his second visit to Britain. In London, Abdu'l-Bahá once again stayed at the home of Lady Blomfield in Cadogan Gardens. People from all walks of life sought his presence. Professor Edward Granville Brown, Mrs. Pankhurst, a leading suffragist, people without appointments, Lord Lamington, former governor of Bombay, the Maharaja of Jalawar, Mushirul Mulk, the Persian minister in London, Prince Jalaluddin, former governor of Yazd, which is in Iran, reporters, and Mr. and Mrs. Tudor Pole. He spoke at churches and mosques, at Manchester College in Oxford. He spoke to the Esperanto Society, to the Outlook Tower Society, not to be confused with Microsoft's application, and to Theosophists. Lord Lamington, here on the left, and his wife were close friends of a number of early British Baha'is. Lamington was governor of Queensland, Australia from 1896 to 1901, as well as of Bombay, India from 1903 to 1907. He'd been entertained by Abdu'l-Bahá in Alexandria, Egypt in 1911. And now, on Christmas Day, 1912, they talked about many subjects. The Lamingtons listening attentively and referring to Abdu'l-Bahá as our beloved master. Sarah Louisa Blomfield, who's pictured here in the middle, was married to the noted Victorian-era architect Arthur Blomfield and became Lady Blomfield after her husband was knighted in 1889. She was an accomplished writer and humanitarian and compiled the books Paris Talks and The Chosen Highway, which someone referenced earlier this evening. Abdu'l-Bahá made his second visit to Bristol January 15, 1913, and he stayed at Clifton Guest House, the home of Wellesley Tudor Pole, who you'll find here pictured towards the right. Wellesley Tudor Pole is a famous spiritualist who had many visions, and he sought to find the answers to these visions, and he traveled extensively in order to do so, finally seeking an audience with Abdu'l-Bahá by the time Abdu'l-Bahá was released from his imprisonment. On his second visit to Paris, Abdu'l-Bahá stayed in a rented apartment near Trocadero Gardens. He had few public engagements and devoted much of his time to those Baha'is who had come from Persia and other countries in hopes of seeing him. The visitors included the Persian minister, political emigres and aristocrats of Persian origin, young Persians studying in Paris, and notorious ex-wali of Beirut, Rashid Pasha. He spoke to the Paris Esperantists at the home of Baha'is, to a meeting arranged by l'Alliance Spiritualiste and at the Iranian legation. Abdul is here pictured under the Eiffel Tower in January 1913. The Baha'is of Germany had been pleading for Abdu'l-Bahá to visit their communities. He did not notify them because he wanted to surprise them when he arrived. He arrived in Stuttgart unannounced late in the evening on 1st of April, and then he had his attendant telephone the Baha'is. Thrilled at this news, some came at once and more the next morning, to the great astonishment of the hotel staff. Here he is pictured with some of the friends in Stuttgart, Germany. On April 3rd, Abdu'l-Bahá spoke to a large meeting at the City Museum. I came from a distant land, he said. I traveled 20,000 miles until I came to you in Stuttgart. 40 years I was a prisoner. I was young when I was put into prison, and my hair was white when the prison doors opened. Now I am here in order to be united with you, in order to meet you. My purpose is that perchance you may illumine the world of humanity. He went on to state that the religions of the day consisted of differing dogmas, which are the cause of discord and hatred. Religion must be the basis of all good fellowship. He said, think of the turmoil that today exists in the Balkans. The Balkan states have become a volcano. All this ruin originates from the prejudices created by the different dogmas, called forth by superstitions and race prejudices. Mankind today has forgotten what constitutes true religion. Each nation and each people today hold to some definite dogma. These traditions and these dogmas are like the husks surrounding the kernel. We must release the kernel from the husk. The master visited Esslingen, where a particularly joyous meeting was held with 80 adults and 50 children present.
Abdu'l-Bahá was persuaded to visit Bad Margentheim, 100 miles from Stuttgart. There he heard nightingales singing in the beautiful spa garden. Never, he said, since leaving Persia, had he heard so many nightingales singing in such beautiful surroundings, but he would not stay more than one night. Back in Stuttgart, he maintained a busy schedule until his departure for Budapest on April 8th. There were no Baha'is in Budapest. Abdu'l-Bahá stayed at the Ritz Hotel, and through the hospitality of Mr. and Mrs. Stark, he met a considerable number of leaders of thought, including Professor Aminus von Bury, the most eminent Orientalist of Hungary, 82 years old and in ill health. Abdu'l-Bahá visited him at his home on 2 occasions.
During Abdu'l-Bahā's 10 days in Budapest, there were 39 talks and events, 29 newspaper articles about his visit, 12 locations that he visited, 7 meetings with societies, 2 public lectures, and 2 talks at the Theosophical Society.
Pictured in front of the Hotel Ritz are Abdu'l-Bahá, his secretaries, and his reception committee. In Budapest, the hectic schedule of public addresses, visits, and visitors continued unabated. On 15 April, there was a snowstorm, and Abdu'l-Bahá developed a severe cold. He could not leave for Vienna for several days. In Vienna, he stayed at the Grand Hotel. His first visit was to the Turkish ambassador, a man renowned for his fanatical religious views, who was captivated by the presence of the master. The next day, Abdu'l-Bahá was the guest of both the Persian minister and the Turkish ambassador. While in Vienna, he addressed the theosophists of the city 3 times. He left Vienna on 24th April to return to Stuttgart. The Bahá'ís of Stuttgart had arranged for and advertised a public address for the evening of 25th April at the City Museum. The cold Abdu'l-Bahá was still suffering from had settled onto his chest, and that afternoon his condition worsened. Doctors advised him to stay indoors and to use his voice as little as possible. Abdu'l-Bahá chose to ignore this advice. Mr. Balyuzi recounts that while Wilhelm Herigel was giving a talk in his stead, he walked into the hall to the utmost delight and surprise of the audience, a crowd of 1,500, and using his full voice, delivered a discourse on the need of world peace and the power that would guarantee it. The next day, to questions about his health, he answered that the previous night's venture, although considered very risky, had proved the right medicine for him. Abdu'l-Bahá maintained a less hectic schedule for the remainder of his time in Stuttgart and was sufficiently recovered to leave for Paris on 1st May. He knew that he must return soon to the Holy Land. In the Balkans, the conflict that had broken out the previous October had finally ended in April 1913 with the virtual eviction of the Turks from the area. The peace that followed was an uneasy one, as the Balkan League powers began to quarrel amongst themselves over the spoils of war. Letters came for him constantly. On 1st June, a visitor from the Holy Land brought news that there were many pilgrims waiting there for Abdu'l-Bahā's return. On June 6th, Izzat Pasha, once a prominent figure in the regime of the deposed Sultan Abdul Hamid, gave a dinner party in Abdu'l-Bahā's honor. On June 12th at 8 a.m., Abdu'l-Bahá left his Paris hotel for the train station, where he spoke with Baha'is who had come to say farewell, urging them to be united at all times. At noon, his train left for Marseille, which it reached 12 hours later. He stayed the night at a hotel next to the station, and the next morning boarded the P&O steamer Himalaya for Port Said in Egypt. Abdu'l-Bahā's historic tour of the West was over.
Abdu'l-Bahá arrived in Egypt in mid-June. He welcomed pilgrims and guests in large tents pitched on the roof of his hotel in Port Said. Letters continued to pour in from east and west, and there was a constant stream of visitors. Abdu'l-Bahā's tablet answering these letters are in his own handwritings. On 27 June, a Baha'i from Shiraz gave a dinner for all the Baha'is in Port Said. 70 came and ate in the shade of Abdu'l-Bahā's tent. Of course, Abdu'l-Bahā served everybody, and after that, give the sweet to everybody. On 11 July, Abdu'l-Bahā moved to Islamiyah, for the oppressive heat of Port Said was affecting him adversely. On 17 July, he moved to Ramleh near Alexandria. There, he rented 3 houses, one for the Baha'i scholar Mirza Abul Faza'il, and one for secretary and one for him. On August 1st, the greatest Holy League arrived from Haifa with Shoghi Effendi, that time was 16 years old, and one of Abdu'l-Bahā's daughters, Ziya Khanum, who was the mother of Shoghi Effendi. On 17 August, Abbas Hilmi Pasha, the Caliph of Egypt, visited Abdu'l-Bahā. The Caliph had met Abdu'l-Bahā twice before during his previous visits to Egypt and regarded the master very highly. Deputies of the Turkish parliament sought audiences, as did academic staff of the Syrian Protestant College in Beirut. All the time, more letters arriving. Mr. Bailuzi recounts individual Baha'is, and particularly the Baha'is of the East, wrote to him on every conceivable subject. One would ask his advice about purchasing a piece of land. Another would request a name for a child newly born. One would ask him whether to marry, another whether to make a certain journey. He always had misunderstandings to resolve, feeling to suit Baha'i group communities and spiritual assemblies, as more of them came into being, also took more and more of his time for counsel, advice, and guidance. His correspondence was not limited to the Baha'is. Many were the people, not his adherents, who wrote to him and had replies. During the summer and early autumn of 1913, the master's health was greatly restored, but as winter approached, once again, he was increasingly touched by fever and insomnia. These symptoms were greatly aggravated by the increasing erratic behavior of Dr. Frey, who had already caused much stress during Abdu'l-Bahā's western journey. A few days' rest at Abu Khair brought no relief, and Abdu'l-Bahā decided to return to the Holy Land. He took ship on 2nd December and on 5th December arrived back in Haifa. There he sent his attendants on ahead, asking them to ensure that the Baha'is did not gather to greet him as he left the ship. At nightfall, he disembarked. Imogen Hug, an American pilgrim who was in Haifa at that time, wrote, "The homecoming of Abdu'l-Bahā after an absence of 3 years and 4 months was a real festival. Such excitement and happiness as is in the holy household can only be imagined. In Abdu'l-Bahā's house, there is a very large central room around which are the other rooms, and in it Persian rugs were spread and table placed upon which were fruit and sweet. When Abdu'l-Bahā's voice was heard as he entered, the moment was intense, and as he passed through to his room, all heads were bowed. In a few moments, he returned to welcome all. He sat in a chair at one end of the room, and most of the believers sat on the floor. Abdu'l-Bahā was tired, so remained but a short time, and after a prayer chanted by his daughter Ziya Khanum, went to his room. Then the ladies vacated so that the men might enter to see the faces of those 30 earnest men, faces that spoke the fervor of their faith. The earnestness and resoluteness of their purpose was something to remember. I am sure not an eye was dry. He welcomed them and, seating himself on the floor, spoke to them a short time, after which he retired. The next morning, Abdu'l-Bahá went up the mountain to the shrine of the Bahá'í. The Bahá'ís of the Holy Land and the pilgrim, Mr. Barghouzi relates, had already gathered there and lined the pathway which led to the shrine. Abdu'l-Bahá beckoned to them to enter the eastern forum of the inner shrine. He all alone entered the western forum. After 2 days in Haifa, Abdu'l-Bahá went to Akka. A large crowd of people, Baha'is and others, including permanent citizens of the Haifa-Akka area, escorted him into the city which had held him prisoner for so long. Some 6 weeks later, in January 1914, Mirza Abul Fazl passed away in Cairo, and Abdu'l-Bahá grieved deeply at his loss. Look at the artistic graphic. Shows Abdu'l-Bahá journey to the west based on the master's comment to Ahmad Sofra. What relation exists between Akka and Oxford? There is no other save through the power of God.
In the early months of 1914, the shadows of impending war grew even deeper. Even as pilgrims and other visitors continued to arrive in Haifa, Abdu'l-Bahá, frequently fatigued and burdened by so many cares, wrote, "Friends, the time is coming when I shall no longer be with you. I have done all that could be done. I have served the cause of Baha'u'llah to the utmost of my ability. I have labored night and day all the years of my life. Oh, how I long to see the loved ones taking upon themselves the responsibilities of the cause. I am straining my ears toward the east and toward the west, toward the north and toward the south, that haply I may hear the songs of love and fellowship chanted in the meetings of the faithful. My days are numbered, and but for this, there is no joy left unto me." Because of the threat of war, Abdu'l-Bahá could not permit any more pilgrims to visit the Holy Land. Those who were already present were instructed to leave at once. The master consoled them with these words, "Indeed, I am deeply grieved, but I do not say goodbye to you, because there is a complete connection among the hearts, and among the souls there is unity and agreement." By the middle of 1914, Dr. Farid's defection and his defiant unwillingness to accept Abdu'l-Bahá as the center of the covenant was out in the open. He was already traveling and speaking in Europe and planned to visit Britain. Abdu'l-Bahá dispatched 2 young Baha'is, one still a student at the Syrian Protestant College, to counter Dr. Farid's activities in Europe. Laura and Hippolyte Dreyfus Barney left to counter the effects of Dr. Farid's attempts to divide the American believers. On June 28, a Slav nationalist shot and killed the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, in Sarajevo. Austria took this event as the excuse to attempt to regain control of Serbia, and on 28th of July declared war on Serbia. The rush to the abyss now gathered unbreakable speed, driven by the motor of military necessity. Desire for war and fear of being caught at a disadvantage reacted on each other. In July, Edward Getzinger passed through the Holy Land on his way to the US from India. He wrote a graphic account of the conditions. The entire population of Syria is in a state of lamentation. Turkey is mobilizing, and all men between the ages of 20 and 45 are called to the colors, or rather forced to go to the front. Food of all kinds has doubled in price, and within 2 months there will be a famine in Syria. The government has confiscated 80% of all foodstuff in sight, both for man and beast, is taking sheep by the thousands, and for this pays no money whatever. All horses and wagons are taken. The farming section everywhere is devoid of men, and their women and children are hastening to the villages and cities for protection from the marauding bands of Bedouins who are making night raids upon the defenseless homes. Thus, the cities are being crowded, and no food for anyone, nor money with which to purchase it at famine prices. At the end of July, Russia and Germany began mobilization of troops. In early August, Germany declared war on France and invaded Belgium. Within days, Britain too was at war. On the Western Front, armies of Germany, France, and Britain lumbered into place and were soon locked into opposing lines. Russia, urged on by her French and British allies to relieve the intense German pressure in the West, invaded Prussia in mid-August, opening the Eastern Front. Thus began 4 years of hideous trench warfare in which thousands of young men were put to slaughter. Here in the map, you can see the Western Front and the Eastern Front. The German government strove to bring Turkey into the war on the German side. Historically, Britain had been the leading ally of the weakening Ottoman Empire. Ever since the Young Turks overthrew the Sultan in 1908, Germany had worked to gain influence in Constantinople. The new rulers of Turkey hated the very thought of an alliance with Britain. In mid-November, Turkey entered the war aligned with Germany and the Central Powers.
When the war began, Suez Canal was under the control of the British. The canal was an important waterway to support the war efforts. Residents of Haifa feared that the port city would come under attack also. Abdu'l-Bahá made plans to move the Bahá'ís from the Haifa area. Lady Blomfield recounts that those Bahá'ís who were merchants had lost their goods and stores to the government, and that the friends, in spite of their assurance of the master that no guns would be turned on Haifa, were living in constant fear. And the children, having heard terrible stories which were being told everywhere, grew quite ill, always looking around and about with frightened eyes. Abdu'l-Bahá decided to accept the hospitality offered to the Baha'i community by the Sheikh of the Druze village of Abu Sinan. The village is in the foothills of Galilee. Baha'u'llah had once spent 3 months amongst those Druze people who lived 2 hours inland from Akka. The Sheikh offered his own house to Abdu'l-Bahá and his family. Other Baha'is were warmly welcomed in other Druze homes. They lived under the strictest economy, but the pure air and the simple food and the freedom from constant dread of bombardment restored their spirits. In mid-December, Turkish military attacked British forces in the Sinai Peninsula to stop Allied use of the Suez Canal. A few weeks later, British forces deposed Khalifa of Egypt. Haifa, still under Turkish rule, was panic-stricken. Most of the inhabitants fled inland, fearing bombardment by the Allies. Abdu'l-Bahá opened a dispensary at Abu Sinan and engaged a doctor to serve all who needed medical help. He arranged schooling for the Baha'i children. Much of his time was spent in Haifa and Akka, where there was great need of his counsel and of the corn which he had stored, foreseeing the current hardship. Adasiyeh was a farming community established by Abdu'l-Bahá several years earlier. Abdu'l-Bahá purchased a piece of land at a low price because it was rocky and barren. He had asked Persian Baha'is, particularly from Yazd, who were experts in farming in desert areas, to come to the Holy Land to develop it for farming. The farmers would collect the crop, and Abdu'l-Bahá had asked them to store his share in anticipation for the difficult years ahead. Those were the corn that he distributed freely during the war. Abdu'l-Bahá taught the friends to grow nourishing vegetables, which, with the corn from his village of Adasiyeh, kept many from perishing of hunger. Sometimes the governor of Akka or the chief magistrate, the mufti or the pasha would come to visit Abdu'l-Bahá, staying 1 or 2 nights as a guest in Abu Sinan. All consulted him regarding the feeding or otherwise caring for the people during this time of difficulty. On 19 January 1915, Mirza Fazlullah arrives in Akka from Shiraz. He had to travel through India to get there. This was the last visit by any pilgrim for many months. During this time, the sole occupant of the pilgrim house in Haifa was Haji Mirza Haidar Ali. For 5 months, there was no word from any part of the world. The relative inactivity of these months, the absence of pilgrims, and the cessation of correspondence with the outside world did not suit Abdu'l-Bahá. He wished, he said one day, that he had gone to India, where he might be occupied in spreading the teachings. Early in 1915, the Holy Land and all of Syria came under the control of Jamal Pasha, one of the 3 pashas that ruled the Ottoman Empire during the war. In Ottoman Empire, Pasha was the highest ranking military officer, and during the war, they operated with absolute power. As commander of the Turkish 4th Army Corps, his mission was to overrun the Suez Canal and drive the British out of Egypt. Mr. Balyuzi writes, with him came a reign of terror. Throughout 1915 and into the following year, Jamal Pasha was bringing Arab nationalists to trial in his military court. 34 of them were executed and many more were deported. Mirza Muhammad Ali and his associates, long discredited and cowed into silence, now found fresh opportunity to plot against Abdu'l-Bahá. The covenant breakers carried to Jamal Pasha accusations that Abdu'l-Bahá was opposed to the military regime. Lua Getzinger was in the Holy Land from December 1914 through August 1915. She wrote this from Abu Sinan. The beloved was in great danger. Several nights he kept sleepless watch, preparing himself and certain members of the household for what seemed inevitable. I was called to Haifa to make some statements concerning the matter, and when informed by the master of all that was pending, I could but marvel at his gentleness in dealing with its source, his patient fortitude, and his kindness to all concerned. A telegram came, and the master sent us all in great haste back to Abu Sinan. None of us knew the content of the telegram, nor its content. He remained with Ahmad Sohrab in Haifa to meet alone what he alone knew might befall him. In a few days, it was reported in Akka that he was to be arrested and sent to Damascus. The friends and inhabitants of that place, as well as Abu Sinan, were plunged into consternation and despair. The next morning, Abdu'l-Bahá went to Akka, where he remained a short time, quieting, helping and reassuring the people. Then, without sending any word, he came to Abu Sinan. Oh, how we rejoiced to see him, his smiling face, his clear, counseling voice, his loving solicitude dawned all suddenly like a glowing sun in the midst of our darkness. 2 days later, the master spoke to Lua Getzinger for nearly an hour. Among many things, he said, I have been in great danger, and I'm still like one sitting under a suspended sword, which may fall at any moment's notice. For myself, I do not care, and I'm ready for any sacrifice and yearn for the cup of martyrdom. But I'm thinking of those whom I must leave. Their helplessness when I am gone so cries out to me before I go that for their sake I hope to be spared yet a little while. Still, I'm prepared, and I now prepare you for the day will come when I shall go suddenly from the midst of all, and you will see me no more.
Jamal Pasha, once encamped near Akka, demanded to see Abdu'l-Bahá, and the master went on a donkey to see him. Jamal Pasha received the master courteously, but told him that he was a religious mischief maker. It happened that in the days of the Ottoman Sultan Abdul Hamid, Jamal Pasha himself had been known as a political mischief maker. So Abdu'l-Bahá now replied that the mischief making was of 2 kinds, political and religious. And then, pointing at the arrogant Pasha, he said that so far the political mischief maker had not caused any damage, and it was to be hoped that the religious mischief maker would not do so either. In May, Abdu'l-Bahá decided that conditions were calm enough, despite the continuing conflict, to allow the Bahá'ís to return to Haifa. Soon after their return, coastal areas were bombarded by the French fleet. The bombardments were always localized, and the French commanders sent word on shore before they began, so that the local people could stay away from the target areas. Lua wrote, "The bombardments were terrifying, though of short duration. It was wonderful to see the master at such times sitting unmoved, watching from the window, as I beheld him on 2 occasions. During the first bombardment, which destroyed the railroad bridge near Akka, he was sitting thus. I was standing near him, gazing intently upon his countenance, trying to read and understand all that it expressed, when he turned and said with quiet determination, 'I must go at once to Akka. My place is there before the cannon, striking such terror into the hearts of the people, now fleeing away in all directions. They are afraid. I must gather them. They are helpless and hopeless. I must rescue and assure them.' And before the firing had ceased, he was ready to start out. I stood watching him descend the little hill upon which the house is situated, to mount his donkey waiting on the rocky path below." In Haifa, with the Bahá'ís back in their homes, the regular weekly gatherings were once again held in the master's house. In the latter half of 1915, with the war raging on several fronts, Abdu'l-Bahá shared with those gathered the stories of some 80 early believers, most of whom had died many years earlier. These short, poignant biographies, each spoken by Abdu'l-Bahá, were 50 years later translated into English by Marcia Gale and published as Memorials of the Faithful. Marcia Gale wrote, "Abdu'l-Bahá was present at many of these scenes, yet time after time he effaces himself to focus on some companion, often on one so humble that the passing years would surely have refused him history." The book is more than the brief annals of early Baha'i disciples. It is somehow a book of prototypes, and it is a kind of testament of values endorsed and willed to us by the Baha'i exemplar, values now derided, but if the planet is to be made safe for humanity, indispensable. These are short and simple accounts, but they constitute a manual of how to live and how to die. The covenant breakers were taking every opportunity to poison the mind of Jamal Pasha against Abdu'l-Bahá. This account was recorded by Lady Blomfield. In early 1916, about 7 o'clock one morning, Abdu'l-Bahá asked Esfandiar to prepare his coach to travel to Nazareth. Abdu'l-Bahá was not well and was very tired, but Jamal Pasha was in Nazareth, and the master was determined to meet him. The journey took until 7 in the evening, when Abdu'l-Bahá took a room at the German hotel in Nazareth. The next day, the master was invited to lunch at the home of one of the notables, one of the Farhum family. Jamal Pasha and nearly 200 of the war leaders were present at the lunch, where the master sat down at 1 o'clock and arose from the table at 4. During all those hours, Abdu'l-Bahá was speaking in Turkish on philosophical and scientific subjects and on heavenly teachings. So intense was his utterance that all stopped eating while they listened to his blessed words. Jamal Pasha, who had been his great enemy because of false accusations, had not paid the proper respect to Abdu'l-Bahá when he had first arrived. Now, however, having heard the master speak so learnedly and wisely, he was most deferential and full of all kinds of politeness. When the time came for the master to rise, Jamal Pasha most courteously held the beloved's arm to assist him to leave the table, and himself led the way to the reception room and seated the master comfortably. Finally, after answering more questions and giving wondrous light on many subjects, the master arose to bid farewell to his hosts. Jamal Pasha accompanied him out of the house and to the bottom of the steps, and would have gone farther with the master, but was thanked with great kindness and urged by Abdu'l-Bahá to return. This was that Jamal Pasha who was not accustomed to arise from his seat to pay respect to anyone. Abdu'l-Bahá was excessively fatigued and remained that night at the German hotel at Nazareth. The next day, his work of making a friend of an old enemy having been accomplished, he returned to Haifa. For the moment, the efforts of the covenant breakers were stalled.
Tablets of the Divine Plan. In March of 1916, Abdu'l-Bahá began to write the Tablets of the Divine Plan, which is a series of 14 letters addressed to the North American believers, charging them with the mission of taking the message of Baha'u'llah to every part of the planet. O ye heavenly heralds, these letters begin. These are the days of Nowruz. I am always thinking of those kind friends. I beg for each and all of you confirmation and assistance from the threshold of oneness, so that those gatherings may become ignited like unto candles in the republics of America. 8 of these letters were revealed between 26 March and 22 April 1916. Only in the last of the 8 is there any mention of the war, which was then raging. They were sent by postcard to the address of Joseph Hannon in Washington, D.C. The postcards bear the crescent and star seal of the Ottoman censor. Those are tablets that were sent on postcards. In the tablet to the believers of the United States and Canada, revealed at Baji on 19 April 1916, we can glimpse something of the agony of the carnage of war, which filled the master's soul on the eve of the Rizwan festival. O God, my God, thou seest how black darkness is enshrouding all regions, how all countries are burning with the flame of dissension, and the fire of war and carnage is blazing throughout the east and the west. Blood is flowing, corpses bestrew the ground, and severed heads are fallen on the dust of the battlefield. Again he writes, O Lord, draw up the people from the abyss of the ocean of hatred and enmity, and deliver them from this impenetrable darkness. O Lord, make manifest in thy lands humble and submissive souls, their faces illumined with the rays of guidance, severed from the world, extolling thy name, uttering thy praise, and diffusing the fragrance of thy holiness amongst mankind. He's acknowledging the darkness and calling them to the light. Haji Ramadan carries a letter to the Bahá'ís of the world. 1 year later, in the spring of 1917, millions of soldiers had died. Russia was in her revolution, and the Entente, Russia, France, and the United Kingdom, was near defeat. The isolation of the Holy Land was complete at this time. Lady Blomfield wrote, during these very difficult and dangerous days of the war, Abdu'l-Bahá was desirous of sending a tablet to the friends in Tehran, there to be copied and dispatched to the Baha'is in different parts of the world. This was an extremely difficult assignment, but an Arabian Baha'i, Haji Ramadan, stepped forward. He was 75 years old, almost blind, without wife or dependents, and had given away his shop and property to his sons-in-law. Abdu'l-Bahá accepted his offer to walk to Tehran with the letter. The letter began, what though the doors be closed, the roads and the ways barred, and the usual means of communication be no longer existing, yet the streams of union and nearness of heart flow on without ceasing in the ecstasy of spiritual communion. Haji Ramadan was successful. The journey took him 45 days, and after a short rest, he hurried back to Haifa. Through Kermanshah and Baghdad he went, disguised as a peddler with gold in the bottom of his peddler's bags and letters sewn into his cloak. As Lady Blomfield recounts, He laid the gold and the letters with which he had been entrusted intact at the feet of the Master. Behold, by what poor and humble children of God our great event served, said Abdu'l-Bahá, embracing him.
An ominous threat. Between 2nd February and 8th of March, 1917, Abdu'l-Bahá revealed 6 more tablets to the North American believers, expanding the instructions given in the 8 tablets of the previous year. Altogether, some 120 territories and islands are mentioned by name in the tablets of the divine plan. By the spring of 1917, the people of Palestine were suffering severely from increasing food shortages. Locusts descended on the growing crops. Hardships and scarcities increased daily. Foreseeing that famine would soon result, Abdu'l-Bahá arose to cultivate food on properties and lands in the Jordan Valley and beyond, at Samra and Adasiyah, and by the shores of the Sea of Galilee, or Lake Tiberias. This new responsibility took the Master to Tiberias frequently, a journey which he found difficult when the weather was hot. In the Atlantic arena, the ruthless submarine attacks of the Germans against neutral American ships and an attempt to incite Mexico to act against the United States pushed President Wilson to declare war on Germany on 6 April 1917. But it would be many months before the United States, unprepared for war, could make up for the loss of Russia in the east. Also in April, the British forces struggling to take Gaza were defeated. This reversal led to General Allenby being appointed to take Gaza and lead an offensive into Palestine. This offensive was delayed by the need to withdraw most of his troops to fight in France, but reinforcements were dispatched to him from India and Mesopotamia. And here is the image of General Allenby. Allenby takes Jerusalem. By September of 1917, General Allenby was ready to attack. Using the tactics of surprise and speed, he began to roll back the Turkish forces. Jamal Pasha was still in control of the northern parts of Palestine, but Allenby pushed swiftly north. By 14 November, the Turkish forces were driven apart and the port of Jaffa was taken. Allenby then wheeled his forces to the right for an advance inland towards Jerusalem, and on 9 December took control of the Holy City. His advance further north was delayed while the necessary military preparations were made. And here you see underlined Jaffa and Jerusalem. Inland was Jerusalem. Major Tudor Pole. This is the same family that we saw earlier in London. The ceaseless efforts of the covenant breakers continued unabated. So venomous were the reports that they fed to Jamal Pasha that the Turkish commander now expressed intention to crucify Abdu'l-Bahá and all his family on the slopes of Mount Carmel if the Turkish army was compelled to evacuate Haifa and retreat northwards. Major Tudor Pole, the British believer whom Abdu'l-Bahá had visited in Bristol during his western journey, took part in the attack on Jerusalem, but after it, in his own words, being temporarily incapacitated for active service, was transferred to intelligence, first at Cairo, later at Lud, Jaffa, and Jerusalem. News reaching me concerning Abdu'l-Bahā's imminent danger became more and more alarming. I tried to arouse interest in the matter among those responsible for intelligence service activities. At this time, chance brought me into touch with an officer whose social and political connections in London were strong. Through his courtesy and interest, I was enabled to get an urgent message through to the British Foreign Office. At the same time, Major Tudor Pole contacted Lady Blomfield in London. As she recounts, in the spring of 1918, I was much startled and deeply disturbed by a telephone message. Abdu'l-Bahá is in serious danger. Take immediate action, end quote. It came from an authoritative source. There was not a moment to be lost. I went at once to Lord Lamington. His sympathetic regard for Abdu'l-Bahá, his understanding of the ramifications and red tape necessary for immediate action were of priceless value. That very evening, a cable was sent to General Allenby with these instructions, quote, extend every protection and consideration to Abdu'l-Bahá, his family, and his friends when the British march on Haifa. Allenby protects Abdu'l-Bahá. Major Tudor Pole continues. This dispatch passed through my hands in Cairo en route for Army headquarters at Lud. An intelligence was requested to make urgent inquiry and ultimately was passed to me for action. As a result, General Allenby was provided with full particulars in regard to Abdu'l-Bahá and the history of the movement of which he was the master. Allenby at once issued orders to the general commanding officer of the Haifa operations to the effect that immediately the town was entered, a British guard was to be posted around Abdu'l-Bahá's house, and a further guard was to be placed at the disposal of his family and followers. Means were found for making it known within the enemy lines that stern retribution would follow any attempt to cause death or injury to the great Persian master or to any of his household. Allenby takes Palestine. Once the assault on Haifa began, the shells fired passed right over the town and fell into the sea. Allenby took Haifa several days before it was thought possible, and that same day, Lady Blomfield relates, quote, he sent a cablegram to London, which caused everybody to wonder and especially filled the hearts of the Baha'is in all the world with deep gratitude to the Almighty Protector. The cable from General Allenby was, have today taken Palestine. Notify the world that Abdu'l-Bahá is safe.
First days of peace. The very day after Haifa was taken by the British, the governor of Jerusalem, Lieutenant Colonel Ronald Storrs, called on the master. The governor had met Abdu'l-Bahá both in Haifa and in Egypt, where, as he himself writes, I had the honor of looking after him and of presenting him to Lord Kitchener, who was deeply impressed by his personality, as who could fail to be. The war separated us again until Lord Allenby, after his triumphant drive through Syria, sent me to establish the government at Haifa and throughout that district. I called upon Abbas Effendi on the day I arrived and was delighted to find him quite unchanged. Lady Blomfield writes of these first days of peace. We learned that when the British marched into Haifa, there was some difficulty about the commissariat. The officer in charge went to consult the master. I have corn, was the reply. But for the army, said the astonished soldier. I have corn for the British army, said Abdu'l-Bahá. Visit by Wellesley Tudor Pole. Major Tudor Pole reached Haifa on 20th November 1918, a week after the armistice was signed in Europe and the war officially ended. He wrote, the master was looking a little older than when I saw him 7 years ago, and certainly more vigorous than when in England after the exhausting American trip. His voice is as strong as ever, his step virile, his hair and beard are, if possible, more silver white than before. I had brought Abdu'l-Bahá letters from all parts of the world, and he spent the morning dictating replies for me to take away. I gave him the Persian camel hair cloak, and it greatly pleased him, for the winter is here, and he had given away the only cloak he possessed. I made him promise to keep this one through the winter anyway, and I trust he does. At lunch, we had another long talk. Then came the leave-taking and the master's blessing. He sent greetings by me to all his friends in Egypt, Europe, England, and America. Abdu'l-Bahá resumes communication with the Baha'i world. In December 1918, Ahmad Sohrab left Haifa for the United States, carrying with him the tablets of the divine plan, which had been hidden during the most dangerous days of the war in the vaults under the shrine of the Bab on Mount Carmel. Letters from believers all over the world now began to arrive, and Abdu'l-Bahá was much occupied in replying. Pilgrims too were arriving from both east and west. Shoghi Effendi, now 21 years old, was acting as Abdu'l-Bahā's secretary. When the war ended, the American believers began to beseech Abdu'l-Bahá to visit them again. He wrote that their unity and constancy would be the magnet to draw him to America again. In April 1919, during the annual meeting of the Baha'i Temple Unity, the tablets of the Divine Plan were presented to the American Baha'is. A number of American believers began to make preparations to travel and teach in response.
Lord Lamington's Memories of Abdu'l-Bahá. This is in 1919. Relief workers were assisting those displaced and suffering as a result of the war. Abdu'l-Bahá gave generously to the local relief fund. Lord Lamington, who was supervising relief work in the Holy Land from his headquarters in Damascus, called on Abdu'l-Bahá twice in July. On his second visit, Abdu'l-Bahá said that if circumstances permitted, he would visit Ishkabab, then Japan, and India. Many years later, in a letter to Lady Blomfield, Lord Lamington recalled these memories of the Master. And there's a picture of Lord Lamington. There was never more a striking instance of one who desired that mankind should live in peace and goodwill and have love for others by recognition of their inherent divine qualities. At Haifa in 1919, I well remember seeing a white figure seated by the roadside. When he arose and walked, the vision of a truly holy and saintly man impressed itself on me. I think it was on this occasion that he took his signet ring from off his finger and gave it to me. The work of Abdu'l-Bahá, and there's a lovely picture of a young Shoghi Effendi. Abdu'l-Bahā's work increased daily as contacts with believers were restored. Shoghi Effendi wrote, "My head is in a whirl, so busy, so eventful was the day. No less than a score of callers from prince and pasha to simple private soldiers have sought interview with Abdu'l-Bahá. The beloved from morn till eve, even at midnight, is engaged in revealing tablets, in sending forth his constructive, dynamic thoughts of love and principle to a sad, disillusioned world." Beyond the Holy Land, Abdu'l-Bahá gave great encouragement to the founders of Save the Children Fund. Lady Blomfield was closely associated with this organization, founded in 1919. Arrival of Dr. John Esselmont. And there's John Esselmont with Shoghi Effendi and the book that is talked about, Baha'u'llah and the New Era. On the 4th of November, 1919, Dr. John Esselmont, a physician from Britain, arrived in Haifa. Abdu'l-Bahá invited him to bring the manuscript of a book he was writing on the faith. This description of Abdu'l-Bahá is from that book, Baha'u'llah and the New Era. Although nearly 76 years of age, he was still remarkably vigorous and accomplished daily an almost incredible amount of work. Although often very weary, he showed wonderful powers of recuperation, and his services were always at the disposal of those who needed them most. His unfailing patience, gentleness, kindliness, and tact made his presence like a benediction. It was his custom to spend a large part of each night in prayer and meditation. From early morning until evening, except for a short siesta after lunch, he was busily engaged in reading and answering letters from many lands and attending to the multitudinous affairs of the household and of the cause. This is more of the arrival of Dr. John Esselmont. In the afternoon, he usually had a little relaxation in the form of a walk or a drive. But even then, he was usually accompanied by one or two or a party of pilgrims with whom he would converse on spiritual matters, or he would find opportunity by the way of seeing and ministering to some of the poor. After his return, he would call the friends to the usual evening meeting in his salon. both at lunch and supper, he used to entertain a number of pilgrims and friends and charm his guests with happy and humorous stories, as well as precious talks on a great variety of subjects. "My home is a home of laughter and mirth," he declared, and indeed it was so. He delighted in gathering together people of various races, colors, nations, and religions in unity and cordial friendship around his hospitable board. He was indeed a loving father, not only to the little community at Haifa, but to the Baha'i community throughout the world. Baha'u'llah's Instrument for a Universal Peace. This is membership of the Leagues of Nations, 1920 to 1944, and the U.S. never joined. So these are the countries that did join. In December 1919, Abdu'l-Bahá revealed a tablet which he addressed to the Central Organization for a Durable Peace at The Hague, a group of progressive thinkers from a number of European countries. In the tablet, he writes at length of the prerequisites for a just and lasting peace between the nations. Although the League of Nations has been brought into existence, yet it is incapable of establishing universal peace. But the Supreme Tribunal, which Baha'u'llah has described, will fulfill this sacred task with the utmost might and power. Twin historic events. On 27 April 1920, at the 12th Annual Convention of the Baha'i Temple Unity, held in Chicago, several designs of the House of Worship at Wilmette were considered by the assembled delegates, and Louis Borges' striking design was chosen by a majority vote. On the very same afternoon, a knighthood of the British Empire was conferred upon Abdu'l-Bahá in recognition of the work he had done during the war in the Holy Land to relieve the famine and distress. Abdu'l-Bahá accepted the honor as a gift of a just king, but chose never to use it as a title.
We see Allenby is the presenter, and in the back are Baha'is, many of whom were on pilgrimage, even from America, who just happened to be present.
Including Professor Bushrui's father on the right side, I believe.
The one holding the document.
Yeah. Detail. There was much going on. In the spring of 1920, Shoghi Effendi left Haifa, first for Paris and then to study at Balliol College in Oxford. In April 1920, Hyde and Claire Dunn arrived in Australia, and in July, Martha Root set out for South America. In September, work began on breaking ground for the foundation for the House of Worship in Wilmette. And in December of 1920, the first all-Indian convention of the Baha'is was held in Bombay. Pilgrims and visitors continued to arrive in Haifa. In 1921, Fujita came from the United States and Luftwaffe Hampkin from London to assist Abdu'l-Bahá, chiefly with the reception of many pilgrims. There was so much going on in Haifa, as Mr. Balyuzi relates. A house close to Abdu'l-Bahá's house had been prepared for pilgrims from the West. Mrs. Imogene Hogg looked after the pilgrims there during the summer of 1921. A little above Abdu'l-Bahá's house, land was purchased on the other side of the road for the building of the Western Pilgrim House in the future. Abdu'l-Bahá was now 77 years old.
In the early part of 1921, Abdu'l-Bahá health was not good. In March, he stayed for a while at
Tiberias.
Back in Haifa, he spent some nights on Mount Carmel near the shrine of the Bahá'í. He was on Mount Carmel on the evening of the anniversary of the martyrdom of the Bahá'í. There he revealed a prayer in honor of a relative of the Bab who had recently passed away. In this prayer are the words, "O Lord, my bones are weakened, and the whole hairs glisten on my head, and I have now reached old age, failing in my powers. No strength is there left in my wherewith to arise and serve thy loved ones. O Lord, my Lord, hasten my ascension unto thy sublime threshold, and my arrival at the door of thy grace beneath the shadow of thy most great mercy." That night, the master had gone to sleep very calm, quite free from fever. He awoke about 1:15 a.m., got up and walked across to a table where he drank some water. He took off an outer garment, saying, "I am too warm." He went back to bed, and when his daughter Ruhi Khanum later approached, she found him laying peacefully, and as he looked into her face, he asked her to lift up the net curtains, saying, "I have difficulty in breathing. Give me more air." Some rose water was brought, of which he drank. Sitting up in bed to do so without any help, he again lay down, and as some food was offered him, he remarked in a clear and distinct voice, "You wish me to take some food, and I am going?" He gave them a beautiful look. His face was so calm, his expression so serene. Thought he asleep. His long martyrdom was ended. Early on Monday morning, November 28th, the news of this sudden calamity had spread over the city, causing an unprecedented tumult and filling all hearts with unutterable grief. The next morning, Tuesday, November 29, the funeral took place, a funeral the like of which Haifa, nay, Palestine itself, had surely never seen. So deep was the feeling that brought so many thousands of mourners together, representative of so many religions, races, and tongues.
Thank you so very much, friends, for staying with us to the end of this presentation, to the end of this series. We truly appreciate your attendance and your attentiveness during this program. We are now inviting attendees to share stories and quotes. They can be from other years and other authors, but should help us better understand Abdu'l-Bahá. This is an opportunity to practice telling a story from memory.
I want to thank everybody for
Oh, yes.
dedicating this series to my brother Bill.
Right.
He loved this series. He would call me and tell me about it and share the in-depth research that you guys did to create this program. And it really means a lot that you have dedicated this last installment to his memory. Thank you so much.
We're still too close to Abdu'l-Bahá, time-wise, to understand what he was. We have the beautiful titles, Mystery of God, etc., but the mystery is really a mystery. I wanted to share a little bit from this work, Century of Light, about the significance of Abdu'l-Bahá. This is chapter 4. With the passing of Abdu'l-Bahá, the apostolic age of the cause reached its end. I mention that partly because of the particular emphasis that the House of Justice has now given to understanding that the first 100 years of the formative age started on the day after Abdu'l-Bahá passed from this world. So this is very important right now. The House of Justice has spent a lot of time and effort giving us this new 27-page message, which the National Assembly just sent us an email, I think today, saying that we all must study this account of the significance of the first 100 years. But just a little bit further, the House of Justice had this written: no phenomena in any way comparable to the appearance of Abdu'l-Bahá had accompanied any of the divine revelations that had given birth to other great religious systems in recorded history. All of those had essentially been preparing humanity for its coming of age. Abdu'l-Bahá was Baha'u'llah's supreme creation, the one that made everything else possible. And an understanding of this truth moved a perceptive American Baha'i to write. That's one paragraph. He wrote, "Now, a message from God must be delivered, and there was no mankind to hear this message. Therefore, God gave the world Abdu'l-Bahá. Abdu'l-Bahá received the message of Baha'u'llah on behalf of the human race. He heard the voice of God. He was inspired by the Spirit. He attained complete consciousness and awareness of the meaning of this message, and he pledged the human race to respond to the voice of God. To me, that is the covenant, that there was on this earth someone who could be representative of an as yet uncreated race. There were only tribes, families, creeds, classes, etc., but there was no man except Abdu'l-Bahá to understand. And Abdu'l-Bahá, as man, took to himself the message of Baha'u'llah and promised God that he would bring the people into the oneness of mankind and create a humanity that could be the vehicle for the laws of God." I just thought that was an interesting insight.
I was reading Abdu'l-Bahā's Paris talks, the talks that he gave when he was in Paris, and it's all about war. But he says, like, all these people are killed and people go after all this land. And in the end, everyone, including the kings and the rulers, only end up with the amount of land for their burial coffin. I just thought that was a very profound thought.
I remember when I was in college in Albuquerque, Mr. Fujita came to visit. And I remember seeing him sitting there, this little man, and I can't remember where it was, but I remember I can see him sitting there, and I'm sitting on the floor watching. And I don't remember, the only thing I remember about his talk, and I consider this really important, is they must have been goofing around at dinner or something, because Fujita said that Abdu'l-Bahá pushed him so that Fujita's beer went into the soup. And then he started laughing and laughing. And so I like that idea of Abdu'l-Bahá joking around and pushing Mr. Fujita's beard into the soup and laughing about it.
In this book, Seeking a State of Heaven, the German Templars, written by Carolyn Sperry Fox, the George Ronald Publishing Company has done a very good job of bringing in verified accounts of Abdu'l-Bahá, mixing with them. A lot of Baha'is wonder, what happened to the Templars? They were German culturally coming in. There were other American Templars that came in and bought property, and there were other non-Templars that were Americans that owned property in the Templar colony there also. Before World War I, the Kaiser of Germany actually came and visited the Templar colony. They were very, very close to the German government. After World War I, they stayed close, and sadly, when Hitler came into power in 1933, they were ordered at their consulate and in their places to fly the German flag, which was a swastika, which they did, which didn't particularly make any friends in Palestine. After the war was over, there was immediate fighting between the Haganah, the Jewish underground army that was fighting the British, as well as, trying to sort of establish it as Israeli. And in order to maintain peace, the British had all the Germans deported, going to send them back to Germany. And the Templars said, please don't do that. We've been away so long, we don't even know how to live there anymore. And besides, it's a disaster. After the war, we'll all be refugees. So instead, all of the Templars were deported to Australia.
I mean, the postcards were sent because they were the only means of not being censored. Nobody read postcards. Postcards just went through. So Abdu'l-Bahá said, I'll send postcards because this has to go. The war did not stop his efforts. He found postcards, you know? So one way to look at that is, what are our postcards?
Yeah, good point.
So what are our
Awesome.
postcards that we can send or we can use to help open people up so that they can hear Baha'u'llah? Thank you so much for this presentation. The other ones, they're on YouTube. And how do you access the other presentations if you want to see them? And how will you be able to access this one? Thank you.
All right, it's all in the Greenbelt Baha'i Community YouTube channel. Go to youtube.com and search for Greenbelt Baha'i Community.
Most of the content for all 7 of our Abdu'l-Bahá writings and stories, town hall programs came from the book Servant of the Glory, The Life of Abdu'l-Bahá by Mary Perkins.